I'm very glad that you came today on 1st of June 2015, because I would have liked for so many months to start, at least at the beginning of a month, with some focus on the more interested aspect of the technology management within the CPTM, which particularly has been fired off by President Kikwete when he wanted this leveraging technology. The leveraging technology for transformation and all that is becoming a kind of a motto, but actually it was more connected to finance and economics, if you say leveraging, but that's not what he meant. What he meant is how you can make things happen within a country and an economy. And that immediately takes you to engineering and systems, but particularly systems. So we were looking for a number of months to take forward that discussion, not only with President Kikwete, but also the other colleagues of his, and a number of our own members. So David, I thought that I never thought I would ever lose you from our own group, because you're a very important point of reference for us. Not necessarily on the way you came about today, but the fact that you brought in Jola, who is almost finishing by September her master in an application of engineering systems in Nigeria. I mean, it couldn't be a better way to come back to this issue. So, David, about your course.
Yeah,
and,
I'd be happy to explain to you the philosophy behind the course.
So the course is called?
The course is called Systems Engineering and Innovation. It's based on an idea that Royal Academy Engineering had, which is the ideal mindset of a systems engineer. They thought was T-shaped, right? And the vertical is actually experience in an engineering discipline. So you know what engineering is like, why it's different from science, how it manages risk and so on. But the horizontal bar was the ability to dialogue with people who were from different engineering disciplines. So you had the capability of bringing all those skills together in a very complex project. So the course was specifically designed, quite unusual for Imperial College, for part-time, because we felt most of our students should have a good industrial background before they joined it. You only really learn why you need to do systems engineering when you've been on a project that went wrong.
That's it.
Right? Okay. Because you suddenly realise you need to organise things better. It's part-time, and there's an opening session, which I think would be very familiar to you, which is about systems thinking about the system as a whole. And then in each subsequent term, there's a deep dive into different types of engineering. Imperial is the biggest engineering faculty in Europe, so we have plenty to choose from. And the students have an opportunity to see how different the engineering is, not technically, but the way it's processed, because of the constraints of the sort of thing you're doing. So when they visit nuclear engineering, there's a lot of very familiar things with process engineering, except that everything has to be right once and first, because it always will be too radioactive to ever come back and fix it. And this changes the whole way you think about the process, the number of layers of security you need in order to make the thing secure. And then you can come to process chemical engineering, where a lot of things are very constant, so you have an opportunity to optimize everything, and you take on a completely different type of technology, which is a heavy optimization one we look at. And then the students have an opportunity to join energy policy, which is where you're trying to think outside the system to all the meta-system issues that fit on it. Because actually the meta-system is at least as important as where your customers and clients reside, and do that process. And then the last part is that half the marks, half the effort, is devoted to a dissertation that's got a very definite structure. The structure is that students have to study a technology they're completely unfamiliar with, and then look at the systems implications of bringing that technology into an area of technology they're very familiar with. And then at the very end, construct a sort of business case model about how would you actually make enough profit bringing this idea to actually make it happen and become an innovation rather than just a novelty. Yeah. So that takes most people 2 years part-time. Brilliant students like Jola can squeeze through and just do it in a year. Yeah.
In a year. So Jola, you welcome to the hub.
Thank
So
you.
your background initially,
Yes.
you're coming from Lagos.
Yes, from University of Lagos. I did systems engineering in University of Lagos.
How long
years?
was it? Yeah.
4 years.
4 years.
Course.
Uh-huh.
Yes. And then after that, I worked in the engineering agency in Nigeria on research and development methods into advanced manufacturing. And, yes. And then I decided to come to do my master's in systems engineering and understand
On this course.
systems engineering and innovation, and understand the way, as David said, how to apply the systems thinking, which is what we're introduced to at first, to technology that we're not used to, like the nuclear engineering, and see how to think about processes better and apply them to areas that some familiar, some unfamiliar areas. Understand why projects fail and how to make them better, so that when you're planning next, or how to even manage the innovation process on new projects, and understand the meta system in which they operate in at the same time. Yeah.
So the dissertation will be now based on this component
yes.
that David said.
Yeah.
So if
My dissertation is on...
if you allow yourself. Allow yourself to explain
Yeah.
the others? Okay.
Yes. So my dissertation is on rural electrification and understanding how to use it, create value to the people who don't earn much money. The base of the pyramid is people who earn less than $2 a day, and they usually live in the rural communities, which is a large population in Nigeria particularly.
So this is particularly which village or which?
Yes, it's in the one I'm taking a case study from is in Osun State. It's in the southern part of Nigeria. So it's a small community, Ikwi, that's what it's called.
Okay.
And they have different clusters, and they about 200 residents in the whole area. Yes, and they're not connected to the grid at the moment. So we're looking at ways to not just to install electric energy systems, maybe hybrid, maybe PV, but to make sure that it impacts their lives. And there's a social creation, there's an impact, the wealth creation that is generated at the base of the pyramid. Understanding, working with the business school, as Imperial Business School, they've done a lot of projects around Africa.
What does that have to do with engineering? This,
well, systems engineering is understanding how everything works in a meta system. Not just the technology, but you're looking at the policies that are affected, you're looking at the finances, you're looking at the human lives, the users. Because if you're focused just on the technology, you can install something and nobody's going to use it, which is the problem that you find. People try to bring Western technology into a context that's not familiar with them. And systems engineering tries to look at not just the technology, which is everybody's talking smart systems now. So we're not trying to just focus on the smart systems as they work in the Western, in developed countries. We're trying to integrate it into our own context and see how to implement that. And yes, so
the kind of technology that you are focusing to make it part of is, what is it?
Well, the optimization model I'm using looks at the different types of technology. So we consider small hydro because there's a stream in the area, PV, and that we have to look at photovoltaic, sorry, and then wind, but not so much because we have to measure the wind. You find more wind capacity in certain areas than you have in others. You also have to look at the agriculture activity to see if biomass is a feasibility in that area. And then for the optimization model that I'm looking at is something that the business school has done. There are different ones. There's HOMA, there's LEAP, and there's SURE DSS, which is Sustainable Rural Energy Decision Support Tools. What they do is look at the mix of the technology. You might have to mix small hydro and a diesel generator, or small hydro and PV, and see which ones will work better together for that community area.
And this is a decentralized,
decentralized, yes.
local government, local,
yes,
formed of chiefs,
yes,
and families and so on.
Yes. To see how to make that. Yeah. So it's a holistic. It's not just an engineering project. It's a holistic looking at how everything works together. So
let me ask you something. You did talk to the chief.
Yes.
Now, without necessarily saying holistic, don't you think that the chiefs usually look holistically to look after their own? They don't need necessarily to understand systems. They do have to approach the whole thing in a holistic manner without necessarily articulating that it's holistic. Did you find him very resonating with what you're saying?
Yes, because
unless you threaten him with systems, concepts and all that.
No, most of them look for the well-being of their whatever
the whole
community. But that is why they are the chiefs at that level. They look for how to make their community work better together and to resolve conflicts in a way that satisfies everybody. Which is why they are which is why you have to approach them. Yes, that's why they're interested. If not, they would. If they saw that it wouldn't benefit a particular community, then they would not support your project.
But were you to were one to do similar things replicated in more villages, and then would you go at a macro level? I mean, if you go towards an energy policy, how
so what's
you,
the minimum? So let's say if you pick their model to your village, that's because the existing projects. So if you take it to another village, what the minimum is? How are you going to adapt it to the?
So what's the minimum number? Or
no. How are you going to adapt that your module to another village, another newly selected village?
Yeah.
So it's not a small community you pick.
Well, the first thing to do is to get somebody that you can liaise with, and also do a feasibility study, understand what their needs are. So that's by interaction, constant interaction.
Well, I think he's asking somehow different. Were you to have the size of the smallest or the largest that you could replicate? You can't replicate necessarily, but to kind of say, if I were to have 1,000 of these 200 type of people, and then you would emerge some sort of general kind of understanding, not necessarily of energy policy, but something at a more national level. Although in Nigeria, when you say national, kind of, it's quite huge.
It's quite huge,
Yeah.
So
federal.
On the federal level?
Well, it could be a federal, isn't it? I mean, a federal.
Well, you have to look at the cost implications of that, because connection to the grid sometimes might be cheaper than getting a standalone microgrid. So you have to bear in mind how far they are from the grid and what the federal level, what their plans are to connect that particular area to the grid. So all of that is important in the studies that you do to understand what the plan is for that particular area, to replicate models in different areas. But from the optimization model, you're able to see what the energy needs, how big because their future needs are going to grow once you introduce energy to them. They would want more things, they want more refrigeration, and even their agricultural activities would grow and increase. They'll want more automation, mechanized methods into there. So you also have to put that into consideration in the energy system you're installing for a bigger system.
How and why would you bring the cybersecurity?
Well, one of the ideas behind the course, which is maybe a little different from other systems engineering courses, is that we are trying to anticipate the arrival of heavy software networking between physical devices. That immediately raises the issue about how secure is that network of communication between devices, because there's a tremendous attraction about being able to share resources via software, but there's a terrible danger that actually other less helpful influences will try and interfere with how that works. So the course has some aspects of cybersecurity design in it. Principally, not to make the course engineers, do you remember my T, not to make them necessarily cyber experts, but to know how to talk to cyber experts, but also to know how to tell everyone else in the project that cybersecurity has to be in from the very beginning of the design, rather than add it like a last fence around the house at the very end, because all the experiences that just adding it at the end means that there's a tremendous bonus if the cyber threat can get through that external thing, because the rest of the system is just simply unprepared for the penetration. And then we also have the more general systems point of view, which is whenever you're running a system, sure, there's a plan A for when it's working well. There ought to be a plan B, which gives it resilience when something goes wrong. And maybe one of the big lessons about cyber security is you can't guarantee it, however much money you've spent. And therefore, where is your plan B if you were using a heavily networked system that's still got to be resilient, still got to do some purpose when you've lost temporarily, hopefully, your network security.
So have you introduced in your case study
Not,
a little bit of cyber security?
Not yet, but something I hopefully would look into, because I've just been introduced to it last week. But you know, looking at, when I think about it now, looking at some of the projects that have been done in other parts of Africa, they have a remote monitoring unit that they use to, so when you install the photovoltaic, for instance, they try to link it up with mobile payments and stuff like that. Yeah, because there's a lot of mobile penetration in Africa and Nigeria, for instance, and they're trying to see how people can use their mobile phone or mobile money to pay for things like that. And I can see maybe that's where cybersecurity might come in, to make sure that whatever you're installing, how it's connected to different people to secure the system using that.
We're dealing with this mobile banking for quite a number of years, and in fact on 2nd of July there are a few central bank governors here. You're welcome to come. In fact, you could explain to them a little bit about David, if you have, I don't know what, it's a Thursday, so I don't know if you're teaching or something. But they are looking beyond just the mobile banking. So I mean, there is a mobile banking that is kind of penetrating everywhere. They're looking at products that they can use which are more secure. So ITU, the International Telecommunication with Bill Gates Foundation and whatever, they got into the act now, specifically in relation to the cybersecurity aspect, or security, I shouldn't use it, cybersecurity, security aspect, So it would be interesting if you want to come, to explain to them. And also, there are things to do with, well, central banks took a lead into what is an umbrella called financial inclusion again, to which this mobile banking was attached for those who are very poor. But it's not those who are very poor really that needed this. It's mainly those who are startups, or even later, further than this. And the rural kind of electrification that you're talking about, well, probably would benefit from some sort of financial inclusion approaches, because where do the money come? You said that where there to be funding for what may come up from your study. What sort of funding, for what do you need funding?
For the capital cost, the cost of the energy system itself, but then the studies on how...
So much more. What would you need money for to put it in place? Would you be able to design a kind of implementation of this? Because there is where a central bank, for instance, I don't know about Nigeria, but there was a former governor that was at the point of time involved. So we have a few central bank governors here who would be very interested to just a very specific example to get to relate to. Yeah, so David, so the issue of cybersecurity, big data, and all the rest of it, open policy making, and you name it, all these things. We're trying under the CPTM and within the Smart Partnership movement for about 6 years by now to amalgamate some sort of structure or a pattern through which, coming from different angles,
Right.
say,
Quite a challenge. Yeah.
yes. So it's emerging so quickly, and the issue that I refer to as cybersecurity, or the issue to do with data, or data advisors, or data whatever it is, yeah, or statistics. In fact, the other day there was quite a lot of discussion about how would this big data impact on the normal conventional statistics.
That's absolutely true.
So it's a very big challenge for us on how to amalgamate, to start an elementary map.
Yeah.
So would very much welcome your participation into this more kind of mapping a little bit, because I mean, with examples of immediately points of reference, like the one that, how would you deal with it? How would you, because that's a course, that's a different course, I suppose.
Well, that's a different course.
But still connected with systems.
But it's definitely connected with systems. One of the issues, I think, is maybe that's okay if it turns out that big stores sell more paper handkerchiefs on a Tuesday, then they can send more paper handkerchiefs to their stores on a Tuesday without needing a theory.
Correct.
If, on the other hand, you're using this big data for major social policy changes in a country, maybe you need to understand where these relationships, the big data have said, really came from, because otherwise you won't understand how robust they are, whether they are ephemeral, whether they'll last as soon as people understand what the relationships are. So there's a lot of analysis that has to come along with the technology. It's also true, of course, that just because you've got a lot of data, you may still not know very much. The world collects an unbelievable amount of meteorological data. So it's big data like we've never heard before, and we can still only forecast 4 or 5 days ahead. So it's a great deal of trying to avoid being swept away with this week's fad, when there are some really good golden nuggets to find in the sand. And I guess that's the challenge.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's an area which we need very, very quickly, actually. The group requires some kind of amalgamation of concerns in different areas, not just big data, but they all overlap somehow. Hopefully before August, we're trying to put an initial kind of map. The other thing, David and Jola, forgive me, just while we're doing a little bit of a webcast here for the others, of course, your interest in environmental policy, in climate change, so to speak. Now, what do you think? I mean, here is Paris again coming, so what do you think? Do you think is it because of lack of systems that we're not making too much progress, or we did make some progress, but you're telling me that limits to growth are still there, or
it seems to me that the prospects for Paris producing some sort of outcome seem to me actually quite positive. The slightly disappointing thing is that outcome could probably have been achieved in 1992.
Isn't it?
That's to say that in some sense the world has got into an enormous frenetic exercise, trying to be sounding ambitious, but not necessarily really realizing it. But as I think Jola mentioned, right around the world, people are now feeling the climate's changing. Literally. Right? It's quite possible that the uncertainty in the models is enough not to have a political consensus on doing something really ambitious, but they can always do that next year. it's always a mistake, I think, to think of international climate change meetings as if they were the definitive meeting after which, when they've completed their work, we can all go to sleep. It revisits the issue every year.
Yeah.
And if this year we've managed to get an agreement which is very wide scoping, even if it doesn't sound very powerful, it's a start in a process towards actually beginning to grip the issue. Yeah. But there's a curious sense, I think, in which most people are beginning to feel that something really is happening and changing to the climate. It's still very hard to calibrate exactly how tough and rough that is. My own prejudice, I should say, is that countries are already beginning to acquire noticeably large bills for climate-related damage, and that the international community is going to have to begin to look more seriously about how that repairing that damage is funded.
Do you think technology is evolving? Do you think that technology is evolving as a counter?
I think technology is a really important part of this process, because traditionally political dialogue, political deadlock, is often prized open by technical advance. We would not have solved the ozone layer from CFCs if we had not developed a CFC substitute. Right? And indeed, the negotiations moved nowhere until major companies like DuPont really realised they could produce in volume alternative refrigerants. And I think a similar case applies to electric cars, which would give Lagos better air, and so on. The development of technology always eases it forward. In local environmental issues, sometimes everyone can agree to abstain so they obtain something they still want, which was better. But in large collective things, that is so hard to do. You really need technology just to make it easier, because otherwise it can't be done.
Okay, well, thank you very much.